Canada is about to carve a mountain in half, pump an entire bay inside it, and lock 14 billion kilowatt-hours of energy underground. This isn't science fiction. This is happening right now in the Bay of Fundy, where the tides rise and fall 50 feet twice a day like the ocean is breathing. And if it works, it'll completely change how we think about storing renewable energy. So how do you hide the sea inside a mountain? Keep watching. Let's start with the location, because geography matters here. The Bay of Fundy sits between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia on Canada's east coast. It's shaped like a massive funnel, 170 miles long, getting narrower as you go inland. And that shape creates something extraordinary. The Bay of Fundy has the highest tides on Earth. We're not talking about a few feet difference between high and low tide. We're talking about 50 feet in some places. In the Minas Basin at the far end, it hits 56 feet. That's a 5-story building worth of water, moving in and out twice a day, every day forever. To put that in perspective, at high tide, the Bay of Fundy holds more water than all the world's rivers combined flow in a day. About 100 billion tons of seawater rushes in over 6 hours, then rushes back out over the next 6. It's like the Atlantic Ocean is playing the world's largest game of fill and drain with the Canadian coast. And now Canada wants to weaponize it. Here's the problem. They're trying to solve. Renewable energy is great until the sun goes down or the wind stops blowing. Solar panels at night are just expensive roof decorations. Wind turbines on a calm day might as well be modern art installations. The electricity grid needs power 24/7, but renewable sources are intermittent. They produce energy when nature feels like it, not when we need it. So you need storage. Batteries, right? Not quite. Batteries are fine for your phone or your car, but for grid-scale storage, we're talking about needing to store enough electricity to power millions of homes. The amount of lithium-ion batteries you'd need would cost more than a small country's GDP and take up more space than some actual countries. Plus, they degrade over time, they're expensive, and they have this annoying habit of occasionally catching fire. That's where pumped hydro storage comes in. It's old technology, been around for over a century, but it's still the best we've got for massive energy storage. The concept is simple. You've got 2 reservoirs at different elevations. When you have excess electricity, you pump water from the lower reservoir to the upper one. That's storing energy. When you need electricity, you let the water flow back down through turbines. That's releasing energy. It's basically a giant rechargeable battery that uses gravity instead of chemistry. Pumped hydro makes up about 95% of all grid-scale energy storage worldwide. It's proven, it's reliable, and it lasts for decades without degrading. But here's the catch. You need 2 massive reservoirs with significant elevation difference between them. And you need a lot of water. Most pumped hydro facilities are built in mountains where you've got natural height differences and can dam up valleys to create reservoirs. Canada looked at the Bay of Fundy and had a thought. What if we didn't need to create both reservoirs artificially? What if one reservoir was just the ocean itself? The bay is right there, moving 100 billion tons of water around twice a day for free. We just need to capture some of it. That's where Fundy Ocean Research Center for Energy comes in, or FORCE. These are the people coordinating the various projects trying to harness the Bay of Fundy's tidal power. They've been working on this for years, testing different turbine designs in the water, trying to figure out how to capture all that moving water without the ocean destroying your equipment. Because the Bay of Fundy doesn't mess around. The currents are powerful enough to rip apart inadequately designed turbines. It's happened multiple times. But the turbine projects, while important, are small scale. They might generate enough power for a few thousand homes. The new project we're talking about is different. This is a pumped hydro storage facility that would use the tides to fill an upper reservoir carved into a mountain. And we're not talking about a small reservoir. We're talking about a storage capacity of 14 billion kilowatt-hours per year. That's enough to power over 1 million homes. The company behind this is called Gould Energy. They've been planning this for years, working through the engineering challenges, the environmental assessments, the regulatory approvals. You build a massive reservoir up on the mountain, about 600 feet above sea level. Then you carve out tunnels and install massive pumps and turbines. When the tide comes in and the bay is full of water, you pump seawater up into the mountain reservoir, which you'd get from wind farms or solar installations when they're producing excess power. Then, when the grid needs electricity, you release the water from the mountain reservoir. It flows down through turbines on its way back to the bay, generating electricity as it falls. The beauty of this system is that you're not fighting the tides. You're working with them. The bay fills up naturally every 12 hours. You're just borrowing some of that water temporarily. Now let's talk about the engineering challenges. Because this isn't like building a normal dam. First, you're dealing with seawater, not fresh water. Seawater is corrosive. It'll eat through concrete and metal if you're not careful. Everything in this system, the pumps, the turbines, the pipes, the reservoir lining, all of it has to be designed to handle salt water long-term. That's expensive and complicated. Second, the volume of water we're talking about is staggering. To store 14 billion kilowatt hours, you need a reservoir that can hold around 500 million cubic meters of water. That's a hole in the mountain, roughly the size of 200,000 Olympic swimming pools. You're not just digging a pond, you're reshaping a mountain. The excavation alone will take years and require removing millions of tons of rock. Third, the pumps have to be massive. You're moving hundreds of millions of gallons of water 600 feet uphill. The pumps required for this are industrial scale, the kind of equipment where a single unit weighs hundreds of tons and costs tens of millions of dollars. You need multiple pumps for redundancy and capacity. If one fails, the others keep working. Fourth, the environmental impact has to be managed carefully. The Bay of Fundy is a crucial ecosystem. It's a feeding ground for whales, a stopover for migratory birds, home to unique marine life adapted to the extreme tidal conditions. You can't just start pumping millions of gallons of seawater out of the bay without considering the consequences. Fish and other marine life could get sucked into the intake pipes. The pumping could alter local currents. The discharge could affect water temperature and salinity. Gould Energy has spent years on environmental assessments. They've designed fish screens for the intake structures. They've modeled the impact on local currents and determined it would be minimal given the enormous volume of water already moving through the bay. They've committed to monitoring programs that would track any changes to the ecosystem. Whether that's sufficient remains to be seen, but they've at least done their homework. Then there's the geology. You can't just carve a massive reservoir into any mountain. The rock has to be stable. It has to be relatively impermeable, so your reservoir doesn't leak. If you're storing 500 million cubic meters of water, and your reservoir is slowly draining into the surrounding rock, you've got a problem. Geological surveys of the proposed site have apparently confirmed the rock is suitable. But that's the kind of thing where you really want to be right. The reservoir itself will likely need to be lined, even with good rock. You want a barrier between the water and the stone. That means either a concrete lining or a synthetic liner, or more likely both. We're talking about lining an area that could be several square miles. That's a massive undertaking. The concrete alone would require hundreds of thousands of cubic yards. Access is another challenge. The reservoir is being built on a mountain, which means everything needed for construction has to get up there. Heavy equipment, concrete, liner materials, all of it. They'll need to build roads capable of handling massive trucks and equipment. In some cases, they might need to use helicopters to lift especially large components into place. This isn't like building in a flat, easily accessible area. Every aspect of construction is complicated by the terrain. Now let's talk about the economics. Because someone has to pay for all this. Current estimates put the cost somewhere north of $3 billion Canadian. That's a lot of money. But here's the thing. Pumped hydro storage facilities last for 50 to 100 years with proper maintenance. The concrete doesn't wear out. The reservoir doesn't degrade. You have to replace pumps and turbines occasionally. But the basic infrastructure is essentially permanent. Compare that to lithium-ion battery installations. They might last 10 to 15 years before significant degradation. After 20 years, you're replacing most of the batteries. Pumped hydro has a higher upfront cost but much lower long-term costs. Over the lifetime of the facility, it's actually cheaper per kilowatt-hour stored than batteries at this scale. Plus, pumped hydro has better round-trip efficiency than you might expect. You lose some energy to friction in the pipes, inefficiencies in the pumps and turbines, but modern facilities can achieve 75% to 85% efficiency. That means for every 100 kilowatt hours you use to pump water up, you get 75 to 85 kilowatt hours back when it flows down. That's actually better than some battery technologies. The project also creates jobs, hundreds of construction jobs during the building phase, which could take 5 to 7 years. Then permanent operational jobs once it's running. Someone has to monitor the systems, maintain the equipment, manage operations. These are skilled, well-paying jobs in a region that could use the economic boost. But let's address the elephant in the room. Why is this better than just building more wind or solar capacity? If you need more renewable energy, why not just build more wind turbines or solar panels instead of this complicated mountain reservoir thing? The answer is timing. More wind turbines generate more electricity, but only when the wind is blowing. More solar panels help, but only during daylight. The grid needs power at night. It needs power when the wind isn't blowing. Without storage, you still need backup power plants, usually natural gas, that can fire up when renewables aren't producing. Storage allows you to actually use the renewable energy you generate. That wind farm producing excess electricity at 2 a.m. when demand is low. Instead of wasting that power, you pump water up the mountain. Then at 6 p.m. when everyone gets home and turns on their air conditioning, you release the water and generate electricity. You're time shifting the renewable energy to match when it's actually needed. This becomes crucial as grids try to go carbon neutral. The last 20% of decarbonization is the hardest. You can get to 80% renewable with just wind and solar, but that last 20% requires either storage or keeping fossil fuel plants running for backup. Storage is how you get to 100% renewable. Projects like this pumped hydro facility are essential for that goal. Now, Canada isn't the first to think of using ocean tides for pumped storage. There have been proposals and smaller projects elsewhere, but this would be one of the largest tidal pumped hydro facilities in the world if built. The Bay of Fundy's extreme tides make it uniquely suited for this. Most places don't have 50-foot tides to work with. There's also a geopolitical element here. Energy storage is becoming a strategic resource. Countries that can store large amounts of electricity have more flexibility, more energy security. They're less dependent on fossil fuel imports, less vulnerable to price spikes or supply disruptions. Canada positioning itself as a leader in energy storage technology is smart policy. The technology could also be exported. If this works, the engineering expertise gained could be sold to other countries with similar geography. Norway has fjords. Chile has mountains near the coast. There are other locations worldwide where tidal or ocean-based pumped hydro could work. Canada could become the go-to country for this technology, because there are always risks with projects this ambitious. The biggest risk is cost overruns. Large infrastructure projects have a nasty habit of going over budget. The Channel Tunnel, the Sydney Opera House, Boston's Big Dig, all went way over initial estimates. If this $3 billion project turns into a $6 billion project, the economics change dramatically. Investors get nervous. Political support wavers. Projects can get cancelled halfway through. There's also the risk of technical problems once it's operational. What if the reservoir leaks more than expected? What if the pumps can't handle the saltwater long-term despite all the engineering? What if the turbines don't generate as much electricity as modeled? Large-scale engineering projects sometimes have surprises. You don't know if something works until you build it and turn it on. Environmental opposition is another risk. Even with thorough environmental assessments, there will be people opposed to this. Environmental groups might sue to stop construction. Indigenous communities might have concerns about impacts to traditional territories or fishing grounds. In Canada, projects can get tied up in court for years over environmental or Indigenous rights issues. That adds delay and cost, potentially killing the project. Public perception matters too. If people see this as a boondoggle, a waste of taxpayer money, political support evaporates. The project needs to be communicated well. People need to understand why this is being built, how it benefits them, why it's worth the cost. That's not always easy with complex infrastructure projects. Climate change itself is a factor. The project assumes the Bay of Fundy's tides will continue as they have for thousands of years. But climate change can affect ocean currents and sea levels. If the tides change significantly, it could impact the facility's performance. That's a long-term risk, probably not relevant for decades, but it's something to consider for infrastructure designed to last a century. Let's also talk about what happens during construction. You're blasting into a mountain, removing millions of tons of rock. That creates noise, dust, vibration. It's going to impact the local area. Wildlife will be disturbed. People living nearby will hear constant construction for years. Roads being built, temporary facilities for workers. It's disruptive. The blasting alone is a major undertaking. You can't just dynamite a mountain randomly. You need controlled blasting, carefully planned to remove rock without destabilizing the surrounding area. Each blast has to be calculated, drilled, loaded with explosives, and detonated with precision. Then you remove the rubble, stabilize the newly exposed rock face, and repeat. This process continues for months or years. Millions of tons of it has to go somewhere. It could be used as fill for the access roads or other construction needs. But there's going to be excess. You need quarries or disposal sites. You need trucks to haul it away. All of this has environmental impact and cost associated with it. Worker safety during construction is crucial. Blasting rock, operating heavy equipment in challenging terrain. It's dangerous. There will be safety protocols, training, equipment requirements. Despite all precautions, accidents can happen. Large construction projects, unfortunately, sometimes result in injuries or deaths. That's a human cost that has to be acknowledged. The facility needs to be maintained. Pumps and turbines require regular inspection and maintenance. The reservoir needs to be monitored for leaks or structural issues. The intake and discharge structures need to be cleared of debris. This is ongoing work that never stops as long as the facility is running. Security is another operational concern. This is critical infrastructure. It's controlling large amounts of water and electricity. It could theoretically be a target for sabotage or terrorism. The facility will need security measures, surveillance, controlled access. Now let's imagine this works. The facility is built, it's operational, and it's performing as designed. What does that mean for the region? It means New Brunswick and Nova Scotia have a massive battery. They can store excess renewable energy and release it when needed. That makes their grids more stable and more renewable. Second, it could enable more renewable energy development in the region. Right now, you can only build so much wind or solar before the grid can't handle the variability. With this storage facility, you could build a lot more wind farms. Knowing you have somewhere to store the excess energy, the region could potentially become a net exporter of renewable energy to other provinces, or even to the northeastern United States. Third, it proves the concept. If this works, other similar projects could follow. There might be other locations in the Bay of Fundy suitable for this. Other countries might build their own versions. It could be the start of a new category of renewable energy infrastructure. Fourth, it provides economic benefits beyond just electricity. The operational phase creates permanent jobs. It brings investment into the region. It could spur development of related industries. Turbines, electrical equipment, they might locate near the facility. Universities might establish research programs studying tidal energy and storage. But here's the thing that really matters. Climate change is the defining challenge of our time. We need to decarbonize our energy systems, and we need to do it fast. Projects like this are part of how we get there. It's not the only solution, but it's an important piece. Every large-scale storage facility built makes renewable energy more viable. It makes the grid more resilient. It moves us closer to net zero emissions. Canada has advantages here. Lots of mountains, long coastlines, extreme tides in places like the Bay of Fundy. The geography is right. The engineering expertise exists. The political will seems to be there. If any country can make large-scale tidal pumped hydro work, it's Canada. The Bay of Fundy project is ambitious, maybe even audacious. Carving a reservoir into a mountain, pumping ocean water 600 feet uphill, storing 14 billion kilowatt-hours of energy. It sounds like something from a science fiction novel. But the engineering is solid. The physics works. The economics, while challenging, pencil out over the long term. And the need for this kind of infrastructure is only going to grow. So Canada is cutting a mountain in half to hide the sea inside. It's crazy. It's expensive. It's complicated. And if it works, it might just change everything about how we store renewable energy. The ocean has been rising and falling in the Bay of Fundy for thousands of years. moving incomprehensible amounts of water twice a day, every day, for free. Humans are finally figuring out how to use it. And that carved mountain filled with seawater might be the battery that helps power a carbon-neutral future. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, hit subscribe. There's more where this came from.